Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. Well, we're continuing the disassembly process of my 1960 South Bend 13-inch lathe. And the next component to take apart is the apron. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to pop out this oil tube just so it doesn't get damaged. I may end up replacing this anyway, but just in case. Well, the bottom of the apron is normally full of oil for lubrication, and that gets filled here through this oil cup that's on the lower left. This thing's been painted over. I'm hoping I can clean it up good enough. We'll see. I don't know if these are even available anymore, but we'll try to clean it up first before we go to replace it. Well, the shift handle for the power feed is secured to the shaft with a taper pin, so I'll just use a punch here to knock it out. And that came out of there a lot easier than I had expected. Well, because it won't really do any damage to the metal here, I'm using a dull wood chisel to pry up on the handle in order to get it off the shaft. Well, next is the handle for the half nut, and again this is held on with a taper pin. Well, that's feeling really solid. Yeah, it almost feels like I'm hitting on the shaft and not the other end of the taper pin. Well, I can see the other end of the taper pin. It's not all the way through the shaft, it doesn't look like, so I might have to think about this one for a bit. Well, while I'm pondering that half nut lever, I'm going to come over here to the hand wheel and tap out the taper pin that holds it to the shaft of the hand wheel pinion. I think the easiest way to remove this then is really to tap the pinion shaft out the back of the apron. Well, back over here to the half nut lever, I'm going to try a shorter punch, one of my Starrett punches, and see if that might be a little bit better. Maybe those longer brown and sharp ones had a little bit too much flex in them. I don't know. This still feels like I'm hitting the side of the shaft. It doesn't feel like I'm touching the taper pin. Those are generally softer than the shaft, and you can kind of feel it when you're hitting something hard. So I'm going to try to heat up the lever itself. Maybe that will expand it a little bit. Hopefully not put too much heat into it or into the taper pin because I don't want it to expand. But if I can expand the lever, maybe the shaft a little bit, maybe that will give me enough room then to tap out the taper pin. Well, I'm not going to monkey around with that for too long, so I'm just going to take a center punch here and we're going to drill this thing out. Well, I have had luck in the past of drilling a small hole in a taper pin and using a screw extractor to get it to turn. And once I get it to turn, the pin comes out. So I've got a small screw extractor here and a Starrett tap handle. And it's getting a really good bite, but I'm seeing that screw extractor just twist a little bit more than I'm comfortable with, and I'm afraid I'm going to break it. So maybe we'll go back to drilling this thing and just drill it all the way out. Well, I have some of that taper pin drilled out. Maybe that relieved enough of the pressure internally. Maybe I'll be able to knock it out here with the punch. Let's give it a try. Anyway, I'd rather knock it out than have to drill it out, because that also can create other problems that I'll have to deal with later, but we'll give this a try. Well, unfortunately, that didn't work either, so we'll go back to drilling this all the way through. Got a longer drill bit in here now. I want to make sure that I'm lined up with the hole on the other side. I don't want to go off on a different angle than what it's originally drilled as. Put a little mark here on the handle. That should help me. Well, I've got a little bit of a larger drill now, and we'll try coming in from the other side this time. Well, things were going so well until they weren't. For some reason, the drill has snagged on something, and it won't rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. I can't get the chuck on the drill to grab on it tight enough to get it to move. These pliers aren't going to do anything either, I'm sure. Well, it's snagged on the taper pin, because if I tap on the end of the drill, it actually started tapping the taper pin out the other side. Well, I don't have a whole lot to lose here, I suppose, so I might as well just keep tapping on the drill as if it was a punch and see if I can't just drive this whole thing out the top. Well, I can't seem to get a good grab onto the top of the pin that's already come out. Since I've drilled it through, it's kind of collapsing on itself, and I can't get a good grip on it with the vice grips. Well, I'm not worried about ruining this drill bit. They're cheap enough on Amazon. So with the vice grips on it, I'll just use the hammer and see if I can't just smack it back out the direction that it came, instead of driving this thing all the way up the other direction. Although that might have worked, I'm a little worried that if I get that drill bit in there and it gets stuck, what am I going to do then? That might be a bit harder to deal with. I won't be able to drill it out, at least not without a carbide drill. Oh, boy, that was snagged in there pretty good. The drill actually looks like it's undamaged, at least from the naked eye anyway. I'm sure I'll use it again if I need it. But let's see if I can't tap this thing out now with a punch and see if it won't. Since it got it to move before with the drill bit in there, maybe a punch will get it out the rest of the way. Nope. Well, my punches keep getting stuck in there, and again, I don't want to get a punch jammed up in there where I can't get it back out. So let me go back to trying the vice grips on the top of it and see if I can't at least get enough of a squeeze on it to pull it out. Ah, success. Well, I won't say that was the toughest taper pin I've ever had to remove, but it's up there in the top 5 anyway. I'll use the wood chisel again to try to remove the handle. Well, it's not cooperating coming off the front, but that's okay. There's more than one way to skin this cat. So instead of trying to remove the lever from the front, what I'll do is I'll remove the half nuts here off the back. First, I'll take the screws out of this gib that captures the one side of the half nuts. With that gib off, I can remove the half nuts themselves. They look pretty good. They're a little dirty, but the thread formations on them actually look really crisp. So I think these will be fine to reintroduce into the apron. I'll just use a brass drift now to drive the half nut cam out the back of the apron, and that frees it up from the lever. And while we're at it, I'll just keep driving on this half nut cam and remove it completely. Well, in order to get to the rest of the components inside the apron, I need to remove the oil trough that's held in with these 5 screws. Now there's these pair of gears here at the top of the apron that engage the crossfeed for, power crossfeed. And in the smaller gear, there's a dowel pin that's used to hold it onto the shaft that these ride on. So I've got a punch here, and I'm trying to punch this out so I don't lose it down into the bottom of the apron. Well, I tried to save that dowel pin from falling down in there. I guess I'll have to fish it out of there later. Well, there's also supposed to be a set screw on the other end of the shaft that holds it in place on the apron, but it's missing. So we'll just knock this out with a brass drift. I want to take this worm out now, and it's held in place on either side with these collars that are threaded onto each end, and those collars are pinned in place with a couple of dowels. Well, I've got a punch again here, and I just need to drive these little dowels. They're only about 1/4 of an inch long through the collar and through the worm. Well, these little dowels are probably a little mushroomed over, so I'm just going to just smooth them out here. I've got a Scotch-Brite pad on a die grinder, and I'll just grind them down a little bit until they are flush with the surface of the collar. Well, if they were mushroomed, they aren't anymore, and it's starting to get a little bit of movement here on this dowel pin. I'm hesitant to hit these things too hard because I'm always afraid I'm going to break something, but I guess these things are a little bit more durable than I give them credit for. Well, and of course, my punch is now stuck in that hole. Well, this is the key for the power feed. It rides along a keyway in the lead screw, and as the lead screw turns, the key is engaged, it turns the worm, and then enables the power feed function. Well, to get this one side off here, I've got a punch that I'm going to put in the hole on the right side all the way through. And then I've got another smaller center punch that I'm going to use to try to unthread the collar on the left. It seems to be working. I was hoping that would loosen that collar up enough that I wouldn't be able to hold onto it anymore, but it's not. And I really can't use this double punch technique. So I'm going to have to use a pair of pliers on one side and then use the punch on the other side to turn that collar. Well, that collar captures this bushing between it and the apron casting, and with it removed, I can use some brass punches to drive it out. Well, to remove the collar on the other side, I've got a punch in the hole that's in the worm that dowel pin was sitting on, and I'll just use a pair of pliers to unthread the collar on the right. And I should be able to spin the worm here and get it off of that gear, and it should come out the left side of the casting there. Well, the main part of the worm is it's a little tight in that casting. I'm going to remove the bushing on the right side and see if that might give me a little bit more play. Well, it's pretty tight in that bore, so I'm just going to use a brass drift here and just slowly tap it top, bottom, left, right until it comes out through the other side. Well, there's a taper pin that holds the gear on for the rack pinion onto a shaft, and it looks like it's already halfway out. So my guess is this is going to come out with very little effort, and sure enough it does. It falls into the bottom of the apron. Now the one on the 1942 lathe that I did, the pin or the taper pin here was actually sheared into 3 pieces. And that is the number one most difficult taper pin I've ever had to remove. If I never have to do that again, it'll be too soon. I didn't even know it was sheared in thirds until I removed a third of it using that screw extractor technique I did before. Of course, a brass drift here makes easy removal of the gear and the shaft. Well, removing the clutch should be fairly straightforward at this point. First thing is this grub screw that holds a collar in. There's supposed to be a jam nut on here, but it's missing. And this grub screw actually looks like it's broken, so I'll just use some vice grips to remove it.
That's wrong.
Well, there's this dowel pin that goes through the handle, and I think it acts as a stop to keep you from over-rotating the handle. And when I started removing this, I didn't realize at the time that I didn't need to. I got it most of the way out, and then I decided just to leave it in the handle because it really doesn't need to go anywhere. It can stay where it's at. Well, next I can remove this pin that holds the handle onto the clutch and allows it to pivot. I'm not sure what this part is called, but I'm calling it a yoke. I can screw that off now. This actually has a set screw to hold it on there nice and tight, and it wasn't tight at all. I've noticed that quite a bit of the parts here on this apron that I thought should have been tight weren't tight at all. I want to drive that shaft out for the clutch, and so I'm putting the apron on. It's back up on a little bit of cribbing, so it has a little bit of room to drop out. Well, I did not make as much progress with that as I was expecting, so something else must be holding this whole assembly in place. I don't see anything obvious, and there's nothing in the parts diagram that shows what could be capturing it in here. This should come right out.
No, there we go.
Well, I guess you just got to pry up on the right part.
It's not straight.
Well, looking at this again, I should have been able to drive that shaft all the way through. I guess it's just tight inside the rest of these components. I do want to get it out though. So back to brass drift, I guess. Well, with the clutch clutch shaft out of there now, I can take a look at these clutch plates. And, they're a little dirty, but taking a look at them, they're not majorly scored or anything. I think they're probably in pretty good shape. And there's a spring and this big washer. There's a thrust washer on the back of this. I might be able to find a replacement for this one. I'm not sure yet. Well, the worm gear is held on to the clutch shaft here with a snap ring, and I absolutely hate snap rings. I think I've mentioned it before in other videos on some other projects I've worked on, but they just don't like me, or I don't like them, or maybe it's mutual. but I seem to have the hardest time in getting them extracted from their grooves. Well, and everything else here looks pretty good with the worm gear and the clutch sleeve. Now the last thing down here is this oil washer. It just acts as a slinger. And then I can pull off the idler gear that cams between either the cross slide or the carriage power feed. Now I want to go ahead and disassemble the rest of the shifter and lockout mechanism. This set screw here holds this plunger in place on the lockout arm. Now the plunger and the lockout arm and the shifter cam work in conjunction with each other and provides a bit of a safety mechanism. Essentially, if I have the shifter set for either the crossfeed or the carriage, I can't engage the half nuts. Conversely, if I have it set in the neutral position and I have the half nuts engaged, if I try to move the shifter to either the cross feed or the carriage feed, it won't move, it won't let me. So this plunger locks into a notch in the half nuts, and the lockout arm is cammed up against the shifter. Well, it's a bit of a tight fit in here, but I want to get this idler gear shifter out of the way. It's also got a cam on the side of it that rides up against the lockout arm, and that's whole part of this mechanism to keep you from engaging both the half nut and the power feed. Well, when I go to put this thing back together, I'll have to record some video on how this thing functions. Well, now with that plunger out, I can remove the lockout arm. Well, the last thing I want to remove here is this retaining bushing, or this collar. It's part of the clutch. There's also a thrust bearing that's stuck on the other side of it, on the inside, and that might be one that's going to be difficult to replace looking at its size. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to find a replacement. McMaster doesn't carry this size, and it doesn't look like this bearing is in really good condition, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to reuse it. Well, I think that's it for the disassembly of the apron. It actually went pretty smoothly. Minor complications here and there, but overall, I think it went pretty well. So I've got a lot of cleaning up to do here. I've got to get the paint stripped off of the apron, of course, and get all of these other components degreased and cleaned up on the wire wheel, and maybe put a little bit of polish on the hand wheel. Well, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. It really does wonders for me to know that people are enjoying this, and it also has the benefit of telling the YouTube algorithm that people do like the video, and it helps suggest it to others that may not be a subscriber to the channel. And if you're already a subscriber, well, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. And if you're not, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon. It'll notify you when I publish a new video. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.